Mercury retrograde has a reputation for causing chaos, from tech issues to mixed messages, travel delays, or communication that suddenly feels like it's much harder than it needs to be. But Mercury retrograde is not something that we need to fear, because when we understand what's happening both physically and astrologically, then we're going to be able to work with it more intentionally. So tonight we're going to be talking about Mercury retrograde in Cancer, what it means, why this retrograde may feel especially emotional for some of you, and how to use it as a time to revise things, reflect on things, and reconnect, and also to energetically declutter. Merry meet. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and tonight we are here talking about Mercury retrograde in Cancer, what it means, and how to work with it. So if you are joining us live here tonight, leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the feed. It helps us get this out to more people. Leave that heart or thumbs up even if you're watching this back in replay. And if you are live, remember there's a Q&A at the end of the episode. Make sure to say hi. Let us know that you're here. You can put any questions and comments in the feed. I'll be watching it as we go, and then we'll have our Q&A at the end. So we have a lot to talk about tonight. We're going to dive in. We're going to talk about what Mercury retrograde is, especially what it means physically as well as astrologically. We're going to be talking about how different retrogrades are colored by the sign that they are in. I'm going to be doing a forecast for the different elemental signs and how this retrograde may affect you personally, depending on what your sign is. I'm also going to be sharing some practices that you can do to help you throughout Mercury retrograde. And at the very end, stick around because I'm going to be sharing with you 2 sigils that I made last Mercury retrograde that helped me tremendously, and hopefully they will help you as well. So let's dive in. Like I said, there's a lot to talk about tonight. We're going to start with what Mercury retrograde actually is. And before we begin, I did want to talk about the dates of Mercury retrograde. So at the time of this recording, this is Tuesday, the June 30th, and Mercury retrograde began yesterday on Monday, June 29th. Now, we are in this particular retrograde until about July 23rd. That is when Mercury will station direct. Don't worry if you don't know what that means. We're going to be talking during the beginning of this episode about what it actually means physically to say retrograde versus direct. But this retrograde will then go direct and will be in a kind of post-shadow period for a few weeks, and then we move completely out of it. Now, I also wanted to mention that there are generally 3 Mercury retrograde periods per year. The first one happened in February, late February, so February 26th of this year until March 20th, so right before the spring equinox is when it ended. That Mercury retrograde, I believe, was in Pisces to Aries. Then this particular one that we're in is fully in the sign of Cancer. This one will go until July 23rd, like I said, from now until July 23rd. And then we have another retrograde at the end of the year. That one will begin on October 24th, and it will extend through November 13th. That one will be in the sign of Scorpio, is where it will begin. And I believe that one will move backwards into, I don't know if it's fully in Scorpio. I'll have to check that one. We'll do an episode when we get when we get to that one too, and talk about what that particular retrograde is going to be like. I just want to mention though, as you're going to learn during this episode, there are things that work well during Mercury retrograde, and then there are things that don't work as well during Mercury retrograde. And I have my eye on that last retrograde at the end of the year, and I'm trying to. I will try to remember at the end of this episode to tell you why that's one that we should look ahead to and plan for, because there are going to be some major international events that are going to be happening at that time that could be affected by that retrograde, in particular in the US. So let us dive in though. I'll try to remember to talk about that at the end. Let's start with the physical explanation of what Mercury retrograde is. For those who don't know, Mercury retrograde is not, Mercury itself is not literally reversing direction. It is not literally going backwards. So if you've heard someone say, oh, it means that Mercury is going backwards, well, that's not true. Planets cannot actually physically go backwards. But from our perspective, from our vantage point on the Earth, when we look up at the sky, if we were to track Mercury from night to night, when Mercury is in retrograde, or any planet is in retrograde for that matter, it will appear as though it's moving forward, 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 and then all of a sudden it begins to kind of stop moving position from night to night, and then it will actually begin to appear to look like it's going backwards in the sky until a certain point, and then it will look like it's moving forward again. And that's essentially, when we look up at the sky, at the night sky, that is what a retrograde is going to look like. Now, as I mentioned, Mercury is not actually going backwards. Now, why this happens, why it appears that way, is because from our vantage point on Earth, there's this relationship between how the planet Mercury and the planet Earth relate to one another and move with each other. Now, Mercury revolves around the sun much faster than Earth does. So I think it's really useful to think about the analogy of a car that is moving slowly and a car that is moving fast. So think about being on the freeway or any street for that matter, and imagine a time when there was a car that you were in a faster car and that car was passing a slower car. The slower car, from your perspective, will look like it is moving backwards. Same goes for a train. If there are two trains that are moving and one is going faster than the other, as the faster train passes the slower train, it will appear as if the slower train is going backwards. But yet we know that the vehicles are not moving backwards. It is simply the way that they appear. So that is essentially what is happening physically when a planet is in retrograde. Now, what we care about more as witches and magical practitioners is the more spiritual aspect. And for us, Mercury retrograde, or any retrograde for that matter, is going to be interpreted symbolically. That's the part that we care about, and that's what the remainder of this episode is going to be about. So the usual themes of that planet will appear different. So they may become less straightforward. They may be a little harder to put your finger on it. So in this case, Mercury, the planet Mercury, is mostly known for its relationship to communication, messages, short-term travel, different things like that. And those are the things that are going to become less straightforward. They're going to become more internal, and they're going to become more reflective. So if we want to really use the energy of Mercury retrograde, or any retrograde for that matter, to the best that we can, we don't want to panic and freak out and focus on the things that seem to be going wrong. Instead, we want to move inward, turn inward, and begin to reflect. And so we're going to go in and we're going to go into many different themes tonight about what this Mercury retrograde could look like. And so, but we kind of want to open with it. That is the energy that we are dealing with right now. So this is why Mercury retrograde on the surface is associated with delays, planes getting canceled, buses coming late, miscommunications, misunderstandings in the way that we communicate, or the way that our words are perceived, or the way that we perceive other people's words, missed details like missing something that normally we wouldn't overlook, perhaps in a document or something that we're reading or we're observing, tech glitches, travel complications, like I said earlier, and old conversations that come back around. So you may notice as Mercury retrograde kind of is beginning, or even right in that couple weeks before it begins, old people from your life may show up. Text messages may come in from people you haven't heard from in a while, and things from the past all of a sudden come onto center stage. Now, the deeper meaning and message here, and if you miss everything else, this is kind of the one take home message of tonight's episode, is that the spiritual meaning is not everything will go wrong. So sometimes you'll see people say, oh, brace yourself, everything's going to go wrong. Well, things may go wrong, there may be glitches, but that is not the deeper spiritual meaning here. The deeper spiritual meaning is that we need to slow down and review. And if we slow down and review, we'll probably be less worried or affected by the things that appear to be going wrong on the surface. But we'll also be utilizing this time for the deeper work. That's the gift of the retrograde, if we choose to accept it. So I'm going to dive in now. We're going to talk about what Mercury retrograde means spiritually and magically. Then we're going to look at the emotional side as well. But I just wanted to jump into the chat and say hi to those who are joining us. So if you're here with us live, let us know you're here. I always love seeing you. It also helps the algorithm push this out to more people. If there's more conversation going on, it shows the algorithm that this is an important video, that it should share with other people. So merry meet to Melinda, merry meet to Jen and to Lisa. So Jen says the retrograde has been a beast already. She said both my computer and my smartwatch died on this late Sunday and on Monday. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit later about ways to kind of deal with the tech glitches like that, but it's not uncommon for devices to glitch or to die completely. And even though we've already begun the retrograde, there's still things that you can do to help. There's also things that you will learn in this episode that you can use in the next retrograde to better prepare around the tech stuff as well as around some of the other things. Angie said, so slowing down on things. She said that's kind of hilarious because she said, I got that message from 2 other people today about some physical health stuff. Yeah. So this is really a time of slowing down to me. If you are prepared for it, I think this is actually a really nice time because it sort of gives you a pass for a couple of weeks. So, for example, the things that have been nagging at you, like the conversation that you need to have, or like things that you're worrying about, things that you're worried about doing, I really feel like those things can go on the back burner because we're going to talk later. It's not a great time to sign contracts. It's not a really great time to make big decisions and to like actually do big things that change your life. This is not the best time for that. If this is the only time for that and your life demands that you do that, of course you have to move forward and do that. But if you use the energy properly and you're able to, you can kind of sit back and be like, okay, this is my time to reflect on stuff. I don't actually have to do anything during this time. And that can actually take some pressure off of people sometimes. But yeah, I think, like Angie's saying, she's got some messages about health stuff, physical health stuff, and just slowing down. Yeah, this is a good time to slow down, less doing, and more inner work. Merry meet to Andrea and to Debbie as well. Merry meet. So if you're here with us live, say hi in the chat. Let us know you're here. Let's talk now about the spiritual and the magical side of this. And also, if you have been noticing tech glitches, if you've been noticing weird people popping up from the past or unfinished conversations showing back up, let us know in the chat too. How is Mercury retrograde showing up for you so far? Even though we're only we're on day 2. We're not that far in, but how is it showing up for you? Okay, so what does Mercury retrograde mean for us spiritually and magically? Well, the place to start here is with the themes of Mercury itself. So Mercury is the planet of communication. It's the planet of messages. These messages are the ones that come interpersonally as well as intrapersonally, which means messages inside of you as well. So we always sometimes forget that part, but this is our own internal conversations too. Speech, writing, emails and texts, contracts and agreements, like I mentioned, travel, short distance movements, schedules and timing. So this is where it'll tend to affect like airline flights and bus schedules and things like that. Doctors, office appointments, I always say, like, what we're going to talk later about the things you can do to kind of safeguard yourself, but it's always wise to like double check your appointments twice or three times when you're in a retrograde and you have appointments. Technology issues, which are very common, learning and information. And then it's also important to note that Mercury as a god, so we talk about the kind of the planetary energy of Mercury, but there's also the god Mercury. And the god Mercury is a magician and a messenger. So across different pantheons, he actually can have a similar role to someone like Ganesha in the Hindu pantheon, or like a Legva in the Yoruban pantheon. He is also the trickster. And so that's why you do get kind of the chaotic energy that it sometimes feels like during this time, because he is a trickster god. Mercury is also a psychopomp, which means he's a god who can move between the worlds. So at a symbolic level, Mercury itself and then Mercury retrograde is about movement between worlds. And there's many kinds of worlds, right? So there's the world of thought to speech. So that's where the delays can happen, or the misunderstandings can happen, is from the thought that a person has and then the words that they say out loud or that they write. Intuition to language. So how do we take what we're feeling inside and how do we move it outside of ourselves, or how do we understand the language of our own intuition? Spirit, or the unconscious, into the symbolic. So remember, spirit often doesn't speak to us in words. Oftentimes it will come through as symbols. And so again, how do we interpret those things? And then also question to answer. So these, sometimes we think of worlds as being like the world of the living to the world of the dead. And of course there's that movement, but it's also about all these different worlds, the world of questions to the world of answers. So when Mercury is retrograde, here are some of the things that you might want to reflect on and consider. So what messages have I missed? So rather than feeling like this is a time of a lot of doing, it's a time of going internally and asking yourself, am I missing messages that are coming through for me? So if you're somebody who's been working on intuition, for example, I bring this up because this has been our kind of theme in our Shadow Seekers membership for a couple of months. We've really been focusing on this. So for our Shadow Seekers and anybody else out there who's kind of working on intuition, really examining, am I missing messages because I'm overlooking them, or because I don't know what to look for, or maybe I'm too wrapped up in what I think it is that I'm not going quiet enough to actually listen and go with the flow. What am I not saying clearly? So this is more about your throat chakra and how you communicate. What, look at places in your life, recently or in the past, where you have been misunderstood. What are you not saying clearly enough? Conversation is both people, right? So it can be on the other end, it can be people not understanding it, but what role do we play in the way that we're communicating and the way that we will sometimes get misunderstood? What am I assuming instead of asking? So sometimes we assume all kinds of things. That person's mad at me. I'm not qualified for that job. That's why I didn't hear back from, that employer. I'm, not good at this. This person, we'll make all kinds of assumptions about what we think other people are thinking about us, or about situations. If we're not really dialed into our intuition and we're really not grounded and centered, we will make a lot of assumptions, some of which are true and some of which are not true. So Mercury retrograde is a good time to think about, what are the assumptions that I'm making that just simply aren't true? And what are the assumptions I'm making without actually asking for the clarification? What needs to be written, revised, or repaired, or revisited? So we're going to be talking in a moment about the RE words. Mercury retrograde starts with RE, right? So this is a time of all of those words, revisiting old things from the past, revising the things that we're doing, reconnecting with people, rewriting things. That's what Mercury retrograde is about. And then another thing to consider, what mental clutter is making it harder for me to hear my own intuition. So when it comes to intuition, we are much more better at our intuition when those limiting beliefs and those negative thoughts and the mental clutter is not there, when we are more grounded and we are more centered. So this is a good time because it is a time to examine conversation and communication, and that includes the conversation you have with yourself and the thoughts in your own head. So what of those thoughts are making it harder for you to connect to your intuition, connect to your guides, connect to your deities, whatever it is that you want to connect to? Now, in addition to the spiritual aspect of this, and there is also an emotional component to it as well. Like I said, Mercury retrograde is the time of the RE words. So reflect. So what can you reflect on? Well, what is coming back into your awareness? So really pay attention to the things that pop back into your head from the past. Old conversations that show back up. Many times exes will show back up at this time, or old friends that you haven't talked to in a while. They will like pop back up, sometimes welcome, sometimes unwelcome, right? So when that happens, really go internally, see what's coming up for you, especially because this Mercury retrograde is in Cancer. There's going to be a much deeper emotional component to it than some of the retrogrades in the past. So really, I would kind of look at this entire retrograde from the lens of what is it doing to me emotionally, what emotions are popping up, which ones can I sit with, which ones are harder to sit with. So, kind of reflecting on what seems to be coming back into my awareness from the past. Perhaps even things you thought that you had already completed, and then they show back up. They're showing back up for a reason. What are you being asked to look at again, right? So your guides may push it back out into the future or push it back out into the present because you haven't finished what you had started. And that doesn't mean anything to your own fault. Sometimes it just means like we got as far as we could with an issue at the time, and then it sort of goes onto the back burner, and we wait for a time when it's more energetically ready for that thing, or when we are more spiritually evolved and now we can look at it from a higher perspective. So that can also be why things return. Sometimes we think, oh God, that thing returned, and it must mean that I didn't do enough work on it, or I'm not good enough at this, or I'm doing something wrong. And that is not what it means. It just means you're ready. You're actually, to me, I look at it as more of a positive thing. It means you have spiritually evolved enough that you're ready to relook at it at a different level. So just shifting our perspective around it. Another word for us, reassess. So asking yourself, when it comes to the things that you're doing, is this thing still aligned? Right? So there's many things that are aligned at one point in our lives and they're just not aligned anymore. So ask yourself, is this thing still aligned for where I am right now? Does this plan or this relationship, this belief, this habit, or this commitment still fit? So again, sometimes relationships, commitments, habits, beliefs, they fit at a certain time. They no longer fit anymore. And Mercury retrograde asks us to examine some of those. Now, when it comes to our relationship with other people and to ourselves, there's also the word reconnect. So who or what needs your attention again? It could be you, it could be somebody else, or it could be something else. But what is asking all of a sudden for your attention right now? Doesn't mean you have to give it your attention just because it's here in your kind of aura, it's come back into your aura. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to give it your attention. It just means it's here for a reason. So you have to kind of ask yourself, is it here to test me, to see what I'm going to do, if I'm going to fall back into bad habits or something like that? Or is it here to tell me that there's some more work to do, there's something deeper to go in when it comes to this thing? Is there a part of yourself that you've been ignoring? So that's more your internal relationship. Is there anything about you, inside of you, that you have been ignoring? Maybe your self-care, maybe your inner child, maybe your hopes and dreams and aspirations, or your own grounding or your magical practice. So is there something, a part of you that you've been ignoring, and maybe Mercury retrograde is asking you to revisit that. Now there's also the word revise. So what needs editing? So this can be written things. Maybe there's something you wrote at some point and it's time to go back and edit it. It can also just be like your life. Like imagine like your life was a screenplay. What part do you want to edit? What part do you want to change? What needs to be corrected, clarified, or rewritten in my life right now? Maybe it's all my negative thoughts and my limiting beliefs. Maybe that's the work that it's your turn to do now. And then there's also a decluttering aspect of Mercury retrograde. And again, these are general ideas, general themes of Mercury retrograde. We're about to get into what it means in Cancer, but any of these things could apply to any Mercury retrograde. What mental, emotional, digital, or energetic clutter is taking up too much space in my life? So it can be, again, going back to your limiting thoughts and beliefs. It can be emotions that are just sort of automatic. You just go to them because you're used to going to those emotions, and maybe it's time to cleanse and clear some of those out with a nice releasing ritual. It could be digital clutter. We've been talking a lot about this in our Shadow Seekers group, and in particular our upgrade to the Shadow Seekers group. We've been talking a lot about doom scrolling. So there's a lot of digital clutter. So maybe this is a time to start to make some rules about like limiting yourself to 5 minutes rather than 5 hours scrolling, right? Just to get the news, and then have boundaries around how much you can consume at this time. It can also be energetic clutter, so that could be stuck in stagnant energy in your body, and maybe it's time to let go of some of that. It can also be physical clutter in the house too. So we're going to talk later. This can be a good time about for decluttering just your physical space, not to get overwhelmed and go crazy and clean the whole house. I mean, unless you have the energy for that and it feels good. Maybe it's just decluttering a corner of a room or a drawer or something like that, just to keep it small. Mercury retrograde is often frustrating for us, those of us who like to keep moving forward, which who doesn't, right, when you're on a spiritual path. So it can feel frustrating because it's asking us to slow down. But if you actually can frame it the right way, like I said in the beginning, it's like a pause. It allows you to say, okay, I'm going to take a break from the stress. I'm going to try to go internally right now and do more of this reflective work and not really worry about the doing. And sometimes that can be really helpful for people who are doers, which I know a lot of you are, or overgivers or things like that. So it's a really good time to take the time out for you. Sometimes that slow down is the medicine that you need, the medicine itself. Sometimes that's all you actually need. Because it interrupts that automatic pattern that you're used to just running at all times. It asks you to slow down and notice the things that sometimes you're moving too quickly to see. So here's a question for you. I invite you to share in the chat if you feel called to. But what has already started resurfacing for you during this retrograde? Is it a conversation? Is there an emotion that's been coming up for you? A memory that all of a sudden has been popping into your mind? A plan, an old pattern, something else? So let us know what is asking you to revisit it during this Mercury retrograde over the course of these next few weeks. So share in the chat. Let us know, what's coming up for you. And let me just go back to the chat for a moment, and then we're gonna dive into like how the sign of Cancer is coloring this current retrograde. Okay, so Angie said the printer had a meltdown at work. Yeah, those are the very common things, internet disruptions, things like that. So she said that had, the printer melted down at work yesterday. She said computers have been throwing fits. And I will tell you too, is that the retrograde, it's when it first goes retrograde, And when it goes direct at the end, those are the two most kind of tumultuous times when it comes to the tech stuff, especially, but other things as well. What you will sometimes notice is the middle of it feels like not so bad unless there's a sign change in the middle, which in this particular retrograde, there is not one. This retrograde is just in Cancer. I think it's from like 26 degrees back to 16 and then forward again. So it's common to see the disruptions mostly in the beginning, mostly at the end, especially with the tech. Debbie said, very weird conversations and timing issues. Yep, sounds very much like the beginning of retrograde. She said, I have had a hard time speaking clearly recently. Absolutely. You know, there can be throat chakra issues. This would be a good time to work on your throat chakra for a lot of you. Debbie also said, can it also be organizing? Yeah, exactly. So we'll talk more about that too, like the decluttering and organizing, things like that. Angie said, oh man, I hope that people don't start popping back up. Well, yes, and there are people that we would hope don't pop back up. I will tell you, in the past, there have been people who popped back up for me. Some I want to hear from, and others that I don't. So it can be like a long lost friend that you lost touch with, or you just, haven't been in contact with, and then they come back, and it's just such a wonderful thing. Or it can be an ex, it can be things like that. It can just be testing you. I remember a few retrogrades ago. In fact, this happened to me a couple of times. Like an ex would show back up and all of a sudden message, and I just ignored it, which is something that I wouldn't have probably done several years before that. And so sometimes it can just be a way to like measure your progress, show you, oh wow, look at how you handled it in a different way than you used to be able to. Lisa also says she's having some printer issues. Yeah, and computer glitching right now, not uncommon. Yeah, I'm going to share with you a sigil at the end that is specific to tech and communication. So that will really help you guys if you want to use the sigil later tonight or tomorrow or soon. I'll tell you how to use it, but it's definitely, it's programmed to help with tech. Debbie said, my friend Sam died about 4 years ago, and that always stirs up some feelings, but I wrote a piece on her Facebook page that really helped. Yeah. And so that can be some of the Mercury retrograde work too, is going backwards to the painful things, right? And doing something cathartic around them. Okay. And Lisa said she had some relatives show back up. Yes, totally. Like I said, sometimes welcome, sometimes unwelcome. But again, this is a good time to kind of ground, center, pull out your emotional and spiritual toolkit, do your practices that kind of help you stay grounded and centered. And that will make this much better, especially if there's kind of weird things happening. So let's now talk about Mercury retrograde in Cancer and why it's different than retrogrades in some other signs. So each retrograde is going to be different depending on the sign that it's going to travel in. It's going to be like it's going to take on a different color or different flavor. So Mercury retrograde in Scorpio, which is the one that we're going to have in November, is going to feel different than this Mercury retrograde in Cancer. Now, there will be some similarities. The tech stuff tends to always be there, though I will tell you that like when Mercury retrograde is in an air sign, especially like Gemini, you're going to get more of that tech stuff. As opposed to like in an emotional sign like Cancer, we're going to get more of the emotional stuff, but it doesn't mean that you can't have all of this happening, at once. So, but let's talk about what are the themes of Cancer. That gives you sort of a framework about what this one will mostly be about. So Cancer rules the home and the family. So like family things can pop back up. Belonging, like kind of understanding where do I belong. Emotional safety, so that's why we've got a lot of these emotions coming up, memories and the past, so you may just be like, you may have like a lot of nostalgia, in fact. Mothering and nurturing, so this would be a good time to do some like mother work, so if you have issues with your own mother, this would be a good time to do some of that. If you are in the Shadow Seekers membership, this would be a great time to revisit, or if you've never watched it, the Mother Wound Workshop. This would be a great time for the Mother Wound Workshop. And by the way, I believe too in revisiting things that you have already watched or already done, because you're just at a different perspective now, and you're gonna actually hear it totally differently. Inner child work. So again, that mother-child relationship. So some of your inner child tending, this can be a great time for that. So Shadow Seekers, this could be a good time to revisit one of the two inner child workshops we also have. Caretaking, I know a lot of you are caretakers, so there can be issues that come up around that because we're in the sign of Cancer. This Mercury is in the sign of Cancer and in our sun as well. Boundaries, and I mentioned nostalgia. So with Mercury retrograde in Cancer, the review isn't just going to be mental. So it's not just the thoughts, it's also going to be the emotions. So this may be very emotional for some of you, especially if you already are a water sign. So if your ascendant, your moon, or your sun are in Cancer, Pisces, or Scorpio, you may find that this one hits you more emotionally than others. It doesn't necessarily mean that will happen, but it could. You may find yourself more emotional. This retrograde may bring up old family patterns that you might have thought were done, but they kind of show back up because it's time to look at them more deeply. Unfinished emotional conversations. A conversation that you didn't finish. Again, you may think that you've let it go and released it, but it shows back up for a reason. Memories from childhood, a desire to return home. You may start to remember your childhood home. There could also be an urge to redefine what home means. So this can be a good time, especially if your upbringing and your childhood home was not pleasant. This could be a good time to work on your home at your home right now and make it more pleasant, or make it the way you want it to be. Communication issues with family and friends, those things can also pop up. Old grief and nostalgia may be popping up for some of you. The urge to retreat and pull back in your shell, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, that's a very Cancerian trait, but it's one that would be very much aligned with a Mercury retrograde. So if you feel that urge to pull back into your shell, that's okay. This retrograde's a couple of weeks, and then we'll move out of this energy. But it may just be kind of the universe telling you that is what you need to do right now. Now, one of the things to kind of watch out for, though, are the shadow side of Cancer during Mercury retrograde. So some of these things may pop up for you, and this would be places for you to do some shadow work around, especially if any of this resonates for you. So taking things personally. So sometimes things happen and they are not personal to you, but yet we take them personal, right? So if you feel like you are taking a lot of things personally, or it's part of your kind of personality, this could be a good time to do some shadow work around that. Communicating indirectly. So really asking yourself, how do you communicate? Do you say what you mean, or do you skirt around the issue? Do you use passive aggressive communication? Do you say one thing but mean another? So really kind of exploring that. And then on the flip side of that, kind of observing and noticing people in your life who communicate indirectly, who say one thing but mean another, and how do you, and doing some shadow work around that. Expecting others to sense what you need. So sometimes, we get in this place where we don't say what we need, but we expect everybody else to sense it. So if we're not telling people what we need, then how can we expect the other people to know? Most people are not mind readers. The vast majority of people are not mind readers. Including ourselves. We can be very intuitive, but most of us do not read everybody else's thoughts and know exactly what they're thinking. And so it's really important for us to tell people what we need, not just expect them to sense it. So if you are somebody who has a trouble telling people what you need, then this could be a good time to do some shadow work around that. Overprotecting yourself. So this can be a good time to work on the heart chakra, especially if you're having trouble connecting to other people, right? caretaking too much. Like I said, a lot of you guys are caretakers and givers. And so if you are somebody who has been over giving and caretaking to the fault of burning yourself out or running your energy down, now is a good time to work through where does that come from? Where does that like drive to overgive to your own detriment, where does it come from? Do some shadow work around that. And then holding on to old hurts. So sometimes there are hurts, right? There's a time for us to grieve, and there's a time for us to release, right? To let go. And so to really ask ourselves, how is this old grief and old pain affecting me? So I'll just tell a story about my aunt, and she is no longer with us. She passed through the veils a couple of years ago, but she had an ex-husband named Bob who I don't really remember. I was too little to remember the details of this relationship, but I guess it wasn't good. And she spent the rest of her life checking the Social Security death index frequently, waiting for Bob's Social Security number to show up on it so that she would know he was gone and she could move on with her life. So those are the kind of holding on that is not serving us, right? Because it's keeping us stuck. So there's a grief period that, of course, she should move through or should have moved through, and then there's a time to know when to let go. So if you're holding on to something from the far, far distant past and it is hindering where you are able to move forward, this would be a good time to start to work through that as well. So this retrograde asks us how we communicate when we are feeling vulnerable, very, very Cancerian trait. Do we speak clearly? Do we shut down? Do we hint at things, or do we say what we really mean? Do we protect ourselves so strongly that no one can reach us inside that shell? And if so, is there a way that we can open up, or at least find a way to feel safe enough to open up? So let us let us know in the chat if any of this is resonating with you, or any of these themes, these shadow themes that are popping up. Do any of those resonate with you? Are you getting any ideas for where your work over the next 3 weeks could come from? And then we're going to move into the practical preparation. So what are some of the things that you can do? Let me just jump back into the chat for a moment, and then we're going to go and what do we do about Mercury retrograde? Now that we know what it is and what to expect. So Lisa said she's going to do some decluttering, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Debbie says, I do have a hard time with taking things personally. So that would be really good. That's an indication that's some good work for you to do some shadow work around right now. And she said, and yes, I do tend to overcompensate when I do caretaking. So again, doing some reflective work around it, I do too. So I overserve, I overgive. So it's really important for us to ask ourselves, where does it come from? I know, like in some of the work that I've been doing, it comes from feeling like inadequate, like I'm not good enough, or I have to prove myself, or people will leave me if I don't give so much. And then we just get in this habit of doing it. And honestly, it just blocks the flow of our energy. So this is just a really good time for us to reflect on all of those things and all of those themes that are coming up. You've got the time to do it right now. Okay, so knowing the themes that you're connecting to, well, what can we do? Okay, so let's shift now into what can we do? So the first thing you can do is, it is a reflective time. So this would be a good time to keep a Mercury retrograde reflection journal, or just dedicate a space in your regular shadow work journal or magical journal or whatever you use. Just dedicate a space for that. Alternatively, if you prefer to draw some cards around this and reflect on these questions, that's good too. Or I like to take long walks and contemplate the questions, and sometimes talk into my phone or type notes into my notes app in my phone. So just finding the way that you want to do the reflection. It doesn't have to be a journaling. For me, that shut me down for years, because I was like, I don't really like journaling. And once I realized that there were other ways I could work through this stuff, it just opened up more for me. So here are a few journal reflection questions for you for this Mercury retrograde season. So what is resurfacing for me right now? So just kind of looking at what's going on. Are there people coming back? Are there messages, things that are returning from the past that you haven't dealt with or haven't thought about for a while? So what is resurfacing for me right now? What emotional pattern do I feel I am ready to revise? So if there's kind of an emotional pattern that you're used to being in, what are you ready to revise right now? And what would that look like? And remember, these are meant to be like, I don't think these are questions that are meant to be written in 30 seconds. It's more like take these with you and um, and carry them with you for the next 3 weeks and see what comes up. What part of my home or my inner life needs more care? What part of my home or my inner life needs more care? What am I holding on to because it feels familiar, but not necessarily because it's healthy? So, what am I holding on to because it feels familiar, but not necessarily because it is healthy? And then also, finally, where do I need more protection and where do I need more openness? So, a lot of times it's not an either or, it's like what areas need more protection and more boundaries, and which areas do need more openness and more kind of going with the flow and just seeing what comes up for you over the next couple of weeks around some of these ideas. So we mentioned a lot about decluttering. So I know that that is a theme that is going to come up for a lot of people, especially with Mercury retrograde in Cancer. It's going to be, kind of about our home and our space, our living spaces. So what I would do is I would suggest when you approach decluttering, I wouldn't think of it as the entire house or apartment. I would think of it as zones or spaces. So start with one drawer or one corner or a bookcase and try to be okay with that. Try not to have the big goal of decluttering everything hanging on your shoulder or hanging over your head or weighing on your shoulders. Try to be okay with just this corner for today or just this drawer this week. It depends on what level of kind of anxiety you are with your space. Maybe your altar space, focus on tidying that up and decluttering that if you haven't touched it in a while. Maybe on your computer, I don't know about you, but I will do these periodic cleanses of the computer where I'll delete a bunch of stuff or stuff that's on my desktop, old pictures or like screenshots that I was sharing in posts and things like that. So maybe decluttering the desktop of your computer or one folder that you need to go through. So just keeping this small and contained so we got some success and not overwhelm over a bigger project. One emotional obligation. So like if you feel that you have this obligation, see what you could declutter around that. Like what really needs to be done versus what do you feel needs to be done or you think needs to be done, or it's just an automatic response that this needs to be done. What really needs to be done when it comes to that obligation? Or maybe an old story that you want to go back and, kind of declutter, around belonging or safety or personal care or things like that. So just a good time. Sometimes we think decluttering is just physical and you can start there. Sometimes starting there helps. You start to move things in your physical space and then it creates more energy, more space in your energetic space, and then you'll be able to declutter some of the stuff in your mind as well and in your emotions. And then also, because Mercury retrograde is about communication, because Mercury itself is about communication, sometimes we worry that our words won't be heard the right way. So this can be a good time to do a communication candle spell. At the end, like I said, I'm going to share with you my sigils that you can also add to any of this. But if you want to do a communication spell for Mercury retrograde, I would recommend getting a blue candle. Blue is the color of the throat chakra. Another color that is related to Mercury is yellow as well. So the blue or yellow would be good. If you want some clarity, maybe white, or if you can't find other colored candles, white will always be a good substitute. And then you want to just take that candle. I don't think you need to do a lot with it. You know, if you want to get some herbs or some oils that are connected to communication or the planet Mercury, you can do a little bit of research and get those herbs and oils. Feel free to dress your candle with those. But I think the most important thing is to sit with the candle and send into it your intention, which is clear communication, or whatever your intention is around communication, and send that into the candle. And then maybe say something. To me, it's always better if you just speak from the heart. But if you want something, you can say, may my words be clear. May my words be honest. May what is tangled become known. And may what is ready to be released be released. So I'll say that one more time. May my words be clear. May my words be honest. May what is tangled become known, and may what is ready to be released be released. All right, so let me move on now. I just wanted to do a quick energetic forecast for you. So kind of what to expect depending on what sign you are. And then I'm going to share my sigil, and we'll go to the Q&A and end the episode from there. So as far as an elemental forecast, I decided to do it this way rather than look at every single sign individually. We're going to look at the signs as clusters of the elemental clusters, okay? So also, I did want to bring up something before I forget, is sometimes people don't feel as affected by one Mercury retrograde than another, or they don't feel affected by them at all. A person who doesn't feel affected by a Mercury retrograde at all, it's possible that Mercury is retrograde in their birth chart. So when your birth chart has the planet already in retrograde, sometimes you feel more comfortable in the retrograde space. So for example, I have Saturn retrograde in my birth chart, which is very common for many people because Saturn spends a good portion of time in retrograde. I also have Venus retrograde in my chart, which is like that one happens about every like year and a half or so. I feel more comfortable in Venus retrograde than some people do. So if you're somebody who's never affected by Mercury retrograde, I'd look at your chart to see if it's also Mercury's in retrograde in your chart. The other reason why a person may not feel it as much, it just could be about their sign themselves, how it's connecting to the retrograde. And you also may be more affected by certain retrogrades depending on your sign. So for example, the last Mercury retrograde was in Aries. My Mercury is in Aries in my birth chart. So I may be more affected by it than other people are, or feel it differently than other people do. So let's start with the water signs. So I think this would go for sun, moon, or ascendant. So if you have your sun, moon, or ascendant in Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, that would make you a water sign. You may feel especially emotional, intuitive, and you may feel like a lot of heavy memories during this time. So remember, this Mercury retrograde is in Cancer, and this is where it will stay the entire time. You may find if your moon, sun, or ascendant is in Cancer, you may find old feelings resurfacing for you. You may find family or ancestral patterns that are kind of popping up. You may find that your dreams and your intuition are increasing. I've started to notice more dream activity. I do have a Cancer ascendant, and so I have been noticing more dream activity right now leading into this. You may find that more conversations are more emotional than usual, or they're about emotional things. You may also notice nostalgia or grief, more of that, needing more rest and privacy. So again, this is for the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So my advice to you is let yourself feel what comes up. Try not to suppress it. Don't assume that every feeling is meant to be like acted on, right? Sometimes your feelings are just there to witness them, but not necessarily to act on them. So that would be my advice for those of you who have, especially your ascendant, sun, or moon in Cancer, Pisces, or Scorpio. Now, as far as you guys who are the fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, sun or ascendant or moon, This retrograde may be asking you to pause. You have a lot of fiery energy, right? So it may be asking you to pause, decide what you're going to do first before you post something or you confront somebody or you push through something. Pause. So you may feel more impatient, especially more emotionally impatient right now. You may find yourself speaking too quickly. It's a good time to slow your speech down. You may be waiting for resolution right away, but oftentimes the retrograde doesn't give you that quick resolution. So it's asking you to be patient if you're a fire sign. Old frustrations may be returning and a need to just slow down your pace. So my best advice for the fire signs, before you act, ask, is this my truth or is this just emotional heat, right? Is this just heat energy? Now, for those of you who are the earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn, this retrograde may have to do with routines, especially routines at home, family responsibilities. There could be money issues that come up during this time, scheduling. You may feel responsible for everybody, more responsible than you usually do. You may feel like your household needs more attention than usual. You may notice old financial or family obligations popping back up, and physical clutter may reflect more internal clutter. So if you're feeling like there's a lot of clutter around your physical space, of course, do any work you need to around that, but then turn and reflect inward on what that could be showing you about your emotional clutter. So my best advice for the earth signs right now is to simplify what you are able to. You don't have to carry every single emotional or practical responsibility alone. See if you can let yourself release some of that over the next 3 weeks. And then finally, for our air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, this retrograde may be more about the way you communicate and some social dynamics as well as more mental things. So you may find yourself doing more overthinking than usual, misreading tones, revisiting old conversations that you've had. You might find yourself in some relationship misunderstandings, and the mental noise in your head may get louder. So remember, for everybody, these are not things to be feared. They're simply things that may occur that invite you to go inward and reflect and do some shadow work around it. So my advice for the air signs is do not let analysis replace your honesty. So ask a question, clarify the message, be very clear about the way you are speaking, say what you actually mean, especially if you're somebody who doesn't always say what you mean. Have this be a time to really focus on saying what you mean. So no matter what your sign is, the Mercury retrograde is always just going to ask us to slow down enough to hear what's really being said, what's really being communicated by others, by ourselves, by our own hearts, and by the patterns that are returning, and to ask us to review those things. So I wanted to close now by sharing with you 2 sigils that I made last Mercury retrograde. And again, we're very early in Mercury retrograde, so there's plenty of time for you to use these sigils if you would like. So the first one is kind of a generic sigil. And so this is the best version of it I have. So it's the sign of Mercury with kind of like a half infinity sign around it. So there's like, I didn't do anything to generally to make this, but this is one sigil that I was using. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up putting the 2 sigils on a candle. I'm going to show you the second one in a moment. But this one in particular can be used for anything in Mercury retrograde, just to kind of protect you, to help you to utilize the energy best. This can be used in any general all-purpose spell for Mercury retrograde. I would recommend drawing this on a candle or carving it into a candle or drawing it on a piece of paper and then burning it if that's what you like to do with sigils. Now, if you would like to use the second one actually has an intention in it. So this is the sigil right here. And the intention, so where the sigil was built, is from ease in communication, ease in technology. And so when those two phrases are written out, the letters that are left over after all the vowels and the repeated letters are crossed off are H, L, and G, and then that's what I use to create the sigil. So this sigil is already programmed to help with communication ease and technology ease. Okay, so if that's something that you want, by all means, please use this sigil. Like I said, you can carve it into a candle. You can draw it on the outside of like a candle that's in a jar if you're using prayer candles. You can also draw it on a piece of paper and burn it. If you want to use it like that as a sigil, you can draw it on your body. You could draw it somewhere, put it on a sticky note and place it by your computer or something like that. But this is meant to protect your computer, protect you, protect your communication. And again, you can use both of these sigils if you would like. So that is what I have to share with you for tonight. And I guess in closing, like I just want to say is, don't be afraid of retrograde. This is not the end of the world. Sometimes I see people like start up, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Everything's going to be terrible. It's just, when we are prepared for what it's going to be, then the Mercury retrograde, or any retrograde for that matter, is just a chance to go internally and to reflect, revise, reevaluate, reconnect around the themes and the issues of that particular planet, in this case, Mercury. I think too, again, this is a good time for you to take a break from the obligations that you might feel. If there's something that doesn't need to be done right now, see if you can put it off for 3 weeks until we move out of this phase, right? If you are able to avoid signing contracts at this time, that would be a good idea. If you must sign a contract, of course, go ahead and do it. I will tell you that that's kind of like what this sigil is about, is that if you have to do something that has to do with communication or anything regarding to Mercury, this sigil will help to protect you. So draw it on your arm while you sign the contract or something like that. But if you can push off the signing of the contract, that can help. I literally did that because when I bought the house, we were in Mercury retrograde. My entire escrow, which is an accelerated, it was my escrow was like 3.5 weeks. It was very fast, and it happened literally the whole time was Mercury retrograde, and everything that could go wrong went wrong. I was also not as spiritually evolved back then either. And so I really let it undo me. But one of the things I did do is that when we were coming out of escrow, they wanted me to sign the contract when we were still in Mercury retrograde. And I was able to stall them for 2 days so I could sign it when we were no longer in Mercury retrograde. So again, watching out for contracts, big conversations. This is not the time to like make big decisions about your life. This is the time to reflect. And then you can make the big decisions. You can move forward with the actions when we come out of this period, because then you'll have all the knowledge that you will have gained from Mercury retrograde. So when we use it correctly, this is actually a really great time of kicking back and seeing what happens and seeing what's ready to grow and evolve in you. But again, protect yourself, use the sigils along the way, and I think you'll have a much better experience of Mercury retrograde. So I can already see like I see myself like freezing Mercury retrograde, right? I'm glad that the microphone has worked. I did put some protection around the broadcast, so that is good. But sometimes my microphone has gone, it hasn't even like connected at the beginning of an episode when we're doing it right at the start of Mercury retrograde. Okay, so I'm going to just move on to the Q&A really quick. I have a couple of questions. If you have a question for me, it doesn't have to be about Mercury retrograde. Drop it in the chat. And if you're watching back on replay, put a question in the chat for me too. I'll go back through and I'll answer it later. Tom had a question about ideas to give some energetic encouragement toward a friend's ability to secure employment. So he said like a job catching spell, maybe. Yeah, I think that, it's always very kind and very nice to do spells for people. Like I actually have a student who's applying for a job tomorrow, and a big one that she really, really wants. It's actually an apprenticeship, and she asked me if I would do a candle spell for her tonight, so I'm going to do that. So we can actually put a lot of our energy, good energy, and fortune towards others and try to help them in their pursuit. Someone in our coven was actually helping his husband find a job as well, like focused on clarity and ease, right, as he tries to find the job. So I think what I would do for Tom is just make sure your friend is okay with you doing magical help. If you're not able to ask your friend, at least ask him, go into like a meditative state and ask his higher self, from your higher self, ask his higher self if it's okay. Most of the time, the higher self will say yes and then move forward. And I think that it sort of depends on like what the intention is. So you said kind of like encouragement. So it sounds like maybe he's feeling discouraged, like, because I know right now, this is what I told my students who are looking for jobs, is that it's a lot. They're saying on average, it's taking people about 3, but most of the time it's about 6 months to find a job. And that goes for all kinds of jobs. These aren't just like higher level jobs, these are like all jobs. So it's good to like, I would probably include in that spell too, some patience. It's really important to have patience in the job market right now because of where we're at. And so I think a candle spell is always good. You could create a sigil. It's one of my favorite ways to do magic. So create a sigil by writing an intention. So it might be like, encouragement in the job hunting process and patience, whatever it is that you would want your friend to be able to have on their job hunting journey, kind of write that out as an intention. So my friend, you could say like, say their name, right? And then is patient and is encouraged on their job hunting experience. And you can use your own words, whatever it kind of calls to you, and then create the sigil by crossing out the repeated letters and crossing out all the vowels. You'll be left with a couple letters, then create some kind of a symbol. And then from there, you can burn it, write it on a piece of paper and burn it. That's a really nice thing to do. Or you can actually give it to your friend. Like, I made you this. You could put it into a little bag with some job hunting herbs. So like cinnamon would be good, and basil and mint. So maybe put those into like a little piece of cloth, put the sigil inside, tie it up with a ribbon, and you can give it to your friend. Tell them to carry it with them or hang it in their house or put it in the glove box of their car, something like that. And it gives them a little bit of extra encouragement on a hunt that's going to be kind of hard for some people. So I hope that helps, and try that out. Let me know how that worked for your friend. And then, by the way, too, so if you make the little sachet, and then you can just burn the candle as well, and just send them good intentions and good job hunting energy out into the universe. If you work with a deity, you can always bring the deity in as well. There's also a question that Lisa had about herbs. So speaking of herbs, so she had a question about. She said, can we talk about them a little bit? Well, we had an episode a couple of weeks ago about herbalism. So if afterwards, I'll drop that link into the chat and maybe revisit that. But she had some specific questions where she said, she has a lot of dried herbs. She says, do I have to worry about sunlight touching them, or my cabinet being in direct sunlight? So for the majority of every herb is going to be different, but for the vast majority of them, it will be better if they are not in direct sunlight. So if you are able to put them into like a pantry that is darker and cooler, that's probably good advice in general for herbs, but each herb is going to have a different response to sunlight. But in general, I would keep most herbs out of direct sunlight, especially if they're dried, even if they're not dried. I mean, when you're drying them, you probably do want them hanging in some kind of sunlight potentially, but I would keep the dried ones out that you're going to be using. I'd keep those out of sunlight. Will it affect the potency of the herbs? Again, it could. That would be different for every type of herb. And then she said, and when a spell calls for a particular herb, would it matter if it is dried or fresh? It depends, again, what the spell says. If the spell doesn't indicate, it probably doesn't matter. Some people have a preference for fresh herbs versus dried herbs, but again, it's really all dependent on what you can get. In the summertime, it's going to be easier to get fresh herbs, but in the middle of the winter, it may not be easy, and in which case, that's why we have the dried herbs. So I personally, most of my herbalism is dried herbs. I've just gathered and collected herbs over the years, and I have a medicine cabinet of those and a magical cabinet. Most of mine are dried, but in the summer, we do grow some things like sage on the property and mint and basil. And so those would be the times that I would be using the fresh ones. When it comes to fresh versus dried, it might be different quantities that you use for each one. But again, if the particular spell doesn't say what it's calling for, then just kind of use your intuition. And can you substitute one for the other, a dried versus fresh? I think so. Again, to me, spells are guidelines. Remember, the vast majority of spells are not like ancient wisdom handed down from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's a modern witch who wrote it, and it made sense to that person. And so you can always, substitute things. You can make, unless you're doing high magic, which is not the type of magic that I know. I know you're not doing high magic. At least for Lisa, I can speak that much. Unless you're doing high magic, which calls for very specific things and specific words that you're saying, I think there's less to worry about when it comes to substitution within spells. Use your intuition. Get your feet wet by doing some other spells that people have written or that you find in spell books, and then start experimenting on your own. I rarely use other people's spells anymore, just because I've read enough spells, and to me, it's just like I kind of ask myself, well, what do I need most right now? I might go to reference books to look up herbs that are connected to an intention, or look up colors or symbolism or correspondences. But then I tend to like candle magic and sigil magic, and so in sachets and things like that, or poppets, and then I would start to build my spell around that. So I absolutely believe in substitution. And you might even get, like, Scott Cunningham's book on magical herbalism will also list some substitutions for some of the main herbs as well. So I hope that helps. Check out the herbalism video again if you want. And I think that is all the questions that were left for me. Let me go back to the chat and see if there's anything else here. And while I'm doing that too, I'm going to let you know. So next week on 7/7, I'm going to be off for the week. I'm doing a staycation, and I just need some space and time, and do some of my own Mercury retrograde reflection. So there will be no live episode next week. But if you are on the mailing list, I'll be sending you an email anyway with some old episodes that you can go back and watch during that time. And then I'm going to be back on 7/14. I'm going to be doing an episode right at the new moon on the law of magnetism in creating your desired life, and I'm going to share with you some of the tips and strategies that I have used that have helped me out the most. And then on 7/21, I'm going to be doing an episode on Maiden, Mother, and Crone. I will follow that up in August with an episode on Dark God versus Light God. But on 7/28, we'll already be at Lunaza, and we'll be doing our Lunaza episode then. Debbie said, how do you know if the planet is retrograde in your chart? So it'll say when you get your chart, there will usually be an R next to the planet's name. That's usually how you will be able to tell. You don't have to go into an ephemeris, which lists like where all the planets are at any given day in the history of the last 100 years. You don't have to go into that. Usually the place where you made the chart will put a little R next to any planet's names that are retrograde. Elisa or Angie said, no one call your exes. Probably a good idea. If you're going to call your exes, probably wait till after retrograde or do some real thinking about it, but don't follow like compulsive urges to do that. I definitely agree with her. Okay. Jason said, I used this sigil last year on a candle. He said, I burn it every Mercury retrograde where I might have issues with speaking clearly. He said, it's on my computer desk always. Yeah, it's good to just kind of keep it there. And it can be used. It doesn't have to necessarily be used when it's retrograde either. You can just use it anytime that you want more clear communication. All right, well, I'm going to sign off for now. If I missed anything in the chat, I will go back. I'll answer everything once we're done with the live. As always, it's a pleasure to spend Tuesday evening with you. I look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks when I'm back for our episode on the law of magnetism. Make sure to leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the episode. That way we make sure to get this out to more people. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, Body, Mind, Witchcraft. If you are not already a subscriber, that helps us out in our quest to be monetized, but also means that you will always get notified when there are new episodes and you'll never miss a single one. All right, well, happy Mercury retrograde. Hope that this time is a great reflective time for you. Use the sigils to protect yourself. Reach out in the group if you're having issues. And until next time, blessed be.